Alright, we got the trusses welded on, everything's good to go there. So now it's time to rip this thing apart and get some fresh paint on it, get some new bearings, seals, wipers, everything. So I'm just going to start by pulling the calipers off. Pretty simple, just 2 bolts and then the line. So I'm going to pull all that off, both sides, and then we'll start with the knuckles, or the hubs. And I'll show you guys that. I'll rip those calipers off real quick. Probably don't need to see that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Alright, we got the calipers off. Next, we're going to get this hub off. So, you pull these 6 10mm bolts. That'll come off. There's a snap ring in there. And then we'll pull these 12mm nuts. And these can be real tricky, these cone washers behind them, to get them out. So, I'll show you guys one way to do that. So there's just a snap ring on the end of the axle shaft. That ring there can be a little tricky, I guess. Pull these nuts off. So I did spray those washers, some Freol, WD-40, PB Blast or anything. Get them soaking a little bit. And then take a big brass punch and just pound on it right here, and those usually will pop out. All right. There's the hub. So now there is the big axle nut. So you'll take there's a washer behind it that's got tabs on it going around the nut. So this one's only got one on, so you'll just pound that tab off of the nut. And then I'm gonna have to see if I got the right socket for that. If not, you usually, well, I'll just show you. You take a chisel, because these really aren't very tight. It's just to preload the bearing. So just like that, pull the nut. There's the washer behind it. There's another nut. So there's two nuts and a washer in between them. And then another washer. That washer there. And then there's the bearing. This whole hub will come off. Just like that. So there's the bearing. Not too bad a shape. And the other bearing and seal there. So we'll go to the other side, do that, and then we'll start pulling the axle and that whole, all these bearings out in here, and just get the steering arms off, all that good stuff. So I'm just I'll pull the other side off, and then we'll start tackling these knuckles. Alright, let's get the rest of this knuckle, all this assembly pulled apart. First thing we're going to do, take all these 14mm bolts off. This whole spindle will come off. Just like so. And you can get the axle out. So on the burr field there's, I'll show you. There's flat spots on it. Those got to be in the top and bottom position to get it out of the axle housing. Just take note of that. Next, let's pull all these 10mm bolts off the back of the knuckle. And then these are just two halves the metal backing, then there's the felt, there's the rubber, and then another metal ring in there. So that's that. We'll pull these top 4 nuts, bottom 4 nuts off. And these are also cone washers. These ones are a little easier to get off though. So let's take off the flat washers. Take off the lower 4. So you get these top, there's cones on the top and no cone on the bottom. So I get top, you can just hit on the knuckle, the steering arm there, and it pops the whole arm off. Usually. Not on this one. I have to get my punch out. There's one. Pull that whole steering arm off, make sure there's shims, and these shims preload the bearings here, so make sure you, if you're not going to replace the bearings, make sure you keep those shims where they were. But I'm going to have to reshim it all because I'm doing all new bearings. So the lower one, what you can do, take a long punch, go all the way through, and just pop that whole cap out the bottom. Just like that. And there's a shim on the bottom as well. So make sure you keep those. And then pull knuckles off. These bearings are in pretty rough shape, especially that one there. No wonder why the thing didn't turn. So it's getting all new bearings, races, seals, everything. So now I'm going to pull these races out. On either side, you'll have to come through the top for the bottom one and come through the bottom for the top one. On either side of that, there's a cutout. You can fit your punch right in there. And I'm actually doing a different third member, so I'm going to pull that off too. That just simply unbolts. Just pull all the nuts around the outside of it and pulls right out. And next I am going to go through all these parts, clean them up, paint what I can. Alright, next I'm going to separate that hub assembly from the rotor. So there's two bolts from the back side, 14 millimeter. Just pull those out. And then flip the rotor down. We got to pound the wheel studs out. Just take a punch and a big hammer. And it's out. So then you can pull your seal out, get that rear bearing out, pull the race out, and then you can install your new bearings. And then the front, obviously, you gotta put the bearing in when you put the hub onto the axle. So we're gonna go, here, I'll show you guys. What you can do, stick that back in there to get the seal off the ground. And that just pound that bearing out. The bearing and seal will come out like so. And then the race, same thing as on the bearings on the axle. There's two little cutouts. Probably not gonna be able to see it, but you'll know what I'm talking about. There we go. So there's the race. So I'll do the same thing on the other side. Clean the hubs up. And probably shoot a little bit of paint on them. Alright, we got everything cleaned up. Ready to paint. It's all masked off. Got the hubs, spindles, everything. Steering there. There's the axle. I just made a cardboard little block plate for that so we don't get any paint in there. So yeah, just gonna do some primer, throw some paint on it, make it look brand new. Alright, we got the primer done. Turned out pretty good. There's the other stuff. I'll show you guys what I'm using. It's actually tractor paint, which I found to be a lot stronger than just regular spray paint. Yeah, I should be, if you can, you should probably use like automotive paint, but so that's self-etching primer, and then the black. So I found that paint to be pretty good for stuff like this. I mean, even if it starts rusting through a little bit in the future, you can just touch it up a little bit. So shouldn't be a problem. Should look a lot better. So I'm gonna let that dry for a while and then shoot some black on it. And then still waiting for my third member. So when I get my third member, I'll paint that up, and then we can get the axle back together. Alright guys, we got everything painted up. Turned out pretty good. So one thing to note, when you paint, the items you need to mask off. So obviously every surface where something bolts on, you don't want paint. So where the steering knuckles bolt on, on both sides there. And then where the calipers bolt on, you want to mask. On these steering arms, you don't want to get any paint on that mating surface. And also, I masked off the inside of those taper bores where the cone washers sit. And same thing goes for these. The top I masked off, bottom. And then especially here, you don't want any paint where the rotor on the back side, the rotor mounts on there, and then the wheel sits here. So you don't want any paint on either of those surfaces, obviously here too, and for sure in the inside where the bearing races sit. Calipers, I just plugged the holes. That one already has a cap on it. And on the edges here, you mask all the way up because these sit inside of there and spin. So if you have paint on the inside of this bore or on the outside of here, you're going to have some contact there, and it's probably not going to spin very smooth. So there's that. I got the hubs, the hub bodies over here. I took them apart. There's just 2 snap rings in here. You pull them apart. I cleaned it out, re-greased everything. So I'm going to get the hubs back together. Let's see, you can get the inner bearings in, inner bearing race, seal, everything. Let's see, what else can I get done? Can't really get the axle together yet because I'm still waiting for a third member, which is the first thing you need to put in the axle. So there it is. Obviously mask off the ends where the knuckle mounts, and here I put the drain plugs in so you don't get any paint in the inside of the housing. So that's that. It's all painted.